The story about Jesus' first miracle where he turned water into wine happened in a village called Cana in Galilee. The streets were alive with laughter and music. Everyone in town was preparing for one of the most joyful occasions imaginable, a wedding. Weddings in those days weren't just a few hours of celebration, they were week-long feasts full of dancing, storytelling, and plenty of food and wine. It was a time for the entire community to come together, neighbors, families, and travelers passing through. For the people of Cana, this was more than a party. It was an expression of love, unity, and joy. Among the guests that day was a young teacher named Jesus. He was still early in his public life, not yet known by many outside his small circle. He came with a few of his new disciples, friends who had only recently begun following him. And accompanying him was Mary, his mother, whose gentle eyes noticed everything and whose heart always seemed to sense when something important was about to happen. As guests filled the courtyard, laughter echoed through the air. The musicians played lively songs, and children ran around with flowers in their hands. The tables were covered with plates of fruits, bread, roasted lamb, and pitchers of fine wine. The atmosphere was pure joy, the kind that makes time stand still. But in the middle of all that happiness, a quiet problem was about to unfold, one that could turn this moment of celebration into embarrassment and shame. The wine was running out. Now, for most of us today, running out of drinks at a party might be a small inconvenience. But in the culture of the time, it was a big deal. Wine wasn't just a beverage, it was a symbol of blessing, generosity, and hospitality. To run out of it during a wedding meant the hosts hadn't prepared well enough. It would bring public shame to the bridegroom and his family. People would whisper about it for years. Mary noticed it first. She saw the servants whispering anxiously in the corner. The pitchers emptying faster than expected. Her heart stirred with compassion. She didn't want this joyful celebration to end in humiliation. So she quietly went to her son. "Jesus," she said softly, her voice filled with both concern and faith, "they have no more wine." She didn't demand. She didn't panic. She simply told him the problem, knowing deep down that if anyone could help, it was him. Jesus looked at her. "Dear woman," he said gently, "why do you involve me? My time hasn't come yet." His words weren't rude, they were calm and respectful. He was explaining that his moment to reveal himself publicly wasn't yet here. But Mary's heart understood something beyond timing. She had seen who he was from the beginning. She didn't argue or explain. She simply turned to the servant standing nearby and said, "Do whatever he tells you." With those words, the stage was set. A quiet, unseen miracle was about to unfold in a small corner of a joyful wedding. Nearby stood 6 large stone jars, each one huge enough to hold about 20 or 30 gallons of water. They were used for ceremonial washing, part of the religious customs of the day. To everyone else, they were just ordinary containers for water. But in that moment, they were about to become vessels of divine transformation. Jesus looked at the servants and said, "Fill the jars with water." The servants could have questioned him. They might have wondered, how can water help us when what we need is wine? But instead, they simply obeyed. They carried bucket after bucket until each jar was filled to the brim. The air was thick with anticipation. No one quite knew what was going to happen next, but something about Jesus' calm authority made them trust him completely. Then Jesus said, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." The servants exchanged glances. This was unusual. How could plain water impress the master of ceremonies? Still, they obeyed. One of them dipped a cup into the jar, and as he lifted it, something miraculous happened, though no one could explain how. The clear water shimmered, deepened, and turned into a rich, ruby-colored wine. He carried it carefully to the master of the banquet, his heart racing. The master took a sip, expecting ordinary wine, but his eyes widened in surprise. He turned to the bridegroom and said, "Usually, people serve the best wine first, and after everyone's had plenty, they bring out the cheaper kind. But you've saved the best for last." At that moment, joy swept through the household again. The servants could barely hide their amazement, they knew what had just happened. What once was water had become the finest wine they had ever seen or smelled. The wedding continued, laughter filled the air once more, and no one but a few, Mary, the servants, the disciples, and Jesus, knew that a miracle had just taken place right before their eyes. But this wasn't just about saving a party. Something much deeper was happening. For the first time, Jesus had revealed a glimpse of his divine power, a quiet beginning to his public ministry. There were no crowds, no trumpet sounds, no loud declarations. Just a simple act of compassion in the middle of an ordinary celebration. That day, the disciples saw something that changed them forever. They believed. They realized that the man they were following wasn't just a wise teacher or a kind soul, he was someone far greater. He carried the power of God himself. And for Mary, her faith was confirmed. She didn't need a grand show or public recognition. Her heart had always known who her son was. Her trust opened the door for a miracle. The miracle of turning water into wine was more than a display of power, it was a message. It showed that God cares about the details of our lives. He didn't just intervene in moments of tragedy or sickness, but also in moments of joy. Jesus cared enough to keep a wedding celebration going, to preserve a family's honor. And to remind everyone that God delights in our happiness. It also showed that obedience and faith go hand in hand. The servants didn't need to understand everything, they just needed to follow the instruction. And in doing so, they witnessed the impossible. Sometimes miracles begin not with something dramatic, but with simple obedience. And perhaps most beautifully, it showed the power of transformation. Water, ordinary, tasteless, colorless, became wine, rich, flavorful, and full of joy. In the same way, Jesus transforms ordinary lives into something extraordinary. He takes what is empty and fills it. He takes what is common and makes it special. He takes what feels hopeless and breathes new purpose into it. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about a wedding in a small town. It's about what God can do in the lives of people who trust Him. As the music played on and the guests danced late into the evening, no one knew that they were celebrating a miracle. The servants smiled quietly among themselves, whispering about what they had seen. The disciples stood in awe, their hearts stirred with wonder. Jesus didn't seek attention. He didn't announce what he'd done. He simply allowed the joy to continue, slipping back into the background while others celebrated. That was his way, humble, gentle, and full of love. This simple act at Cana became the first sign of who he truly was. It wasn't a display of power meant to impress, it was a message of love meant to reveal God's heart. When we look closer, we realize this story isn't just about wine, it's about renewal. The old jars represented old traditions, old systems, and old ways of trying to be clean or acceptable before God. But Jesus came to bring something new, something better. The new wine symbolized grace, joy, and a fresh start. It was as if God was saying, the old ways are fading. I am doing something new, something filled with joy and abundance. And think about it. Jesus didn't just make enough wine to get by. He made over 100 gallons. That's the kind of God we serve, one who doesn't just meet needs, but exceeds them. He gives generously, abundantly, overflowing with goodness. There's also something quietly beautiful about the people involved in this story. Mary, who saw the need and believed before anyone else. The servants, who obeyed without question and became the first witnesses of the miracle. The disciples, who learned to trust deeper. Each one reminds us of something vital. Miracles often begin with faith, obedience, and a willing heart. Sometimes, in our own lives, we face moments when the wine runs out. The joy fades. The excitement disappears. Maybe the relationship feels dry. The dream seems dead. The hope feels far away. We wonder if anything good can come again. But that's exactly when Jesus steps in, when things feel empty, when we've reached our limits, when the jars are dry. If we let Him, He fills those empty spaces with new life. He can turn sadness into celebration. He can bring laughter back into weary hearts. He can turn disappointment into divine purpose. And just like at the wedding in Cana, He may do it quietly, without fanfare, without attention, just transforming things in the background while others see the results and call it good fortune. The miracle at Cana isn't just an ancient story, it's a picture of what God wants to do in each of us today. He wants to remind us that He cares about the small things. He wants to transform our ordinary days into moments of grace. And He wants us to trust that even when we don't see how, He's working behind the scenes. So the next time you find yourself in a situation that feels hopeless or embarrassing or just plain empty, remember this story. Remember Mary's quiet words, do whatever he tells you. Because when we listen and obey, even when it doesn't make sense, miracles can happen. Jesus didn't choose a grand stage for his first miracle. He chose a simple wedding, a small village, a few servants, and a moment of need. That's the beauty of it. He meets us in the ordinary and fills it with the extraordinary. He doesn't just fix what's broken, he transforms it. He doesn't just replace what's missing, he creates something new. And it's always better than what we had before. As the story ends, we're left with this truth: God saves the best for last. You might feel like the best part of your life is behind you, that your joy has faded, your strength has run out, your dreams have dried up. But Jesus has a way of bringing something better, richer, and more fulfilling than before. He turns endings into beginnings. He turns ordinary moments into holy ones. He turns water into wine. So today, take a deep breath and remember, the same Jesus who turned water into wine in Cana still works miracles now. You may not see it right away, but he's filling your jars even now, silently, patiently, lovingly. And when the time is right, you'll taste the sweetness of what he's been preparing all along. Because with Jesus, the story never ends in emptiness, it always ends in abundance. The miracle at Cana teaches us that God is never too far to care, never too busy to help, and never too limited to transform. When we trust him, obey his voice, and invite him into our ordinary moments, he can turn even the simplest parts of life into something divine. So, whatever your empty jar looks like today, hand it over to him, and watch as he fills it with joy, peace, and new beginnings.